Hi there folks, and welcome to Get Strumming. Now, the reason for this bit of a preamble before the next video starts is mainly for the benefit of my valued YouTube subscribers. Now, I know a lot of you would be expecting me to provide you with a video on how to play a certain song on the uke, or maybe even a feature on where a rock star might have lived in London. However, this is a video with a bit of a difference. It's to do with music in so much as the guy featured is a member of my ukulele band in Shelley, the Shelley Over 60s Ukulele Band, and Alan Redgrove joined us about 4 years ago. He told me that he used to work at the ITA Emley Moor television transmitter, located about 2 miles up the road from where I live in Huddersfield. And I just had to interview him on his memories of when the original television mast fell down back in 1969. It's a fascinating story, and I know there's a lot of people out there that would love to hear it. So here is Alan Redgrove telling his story on how the Emley Moor television transmitter fell down in the winter of 1969.
Well, I started off my sort of working life as an electronics engineer. I did an apprenticeship at the Royal Radar establishment in Malvern, as it happened, and from there I sort of didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I went into industrial electronics for a little bit and didn't like that. And quite a few of my friends in doing the apprenticeship had gone into broadcasting of some sort, so I thought I'll have a go. Anyway, I ended up sort of writing around all the likely sort of employers and got a reply back from what was then ITA, Independent Television Authority, and said, we're interviewing now, come down to London. And that's how I got to be at Emley Moor.
Right,
because I lived in the area. I lived in Dewsbury at the time. But,
oh, did you? So,
yeah.
So how old were you at the time then? Early 20s?
Yeah, early 20s. Well, I think I was 21 or 22 when I finished my apprenticeship, and I probably had about 4 years in industrial electronics, and then so I don't know, something like that anyway. So they've been about 25, 26.
So you'd been probably working for at least 7 years then from then.
Well, counting my apprenticeship, at least that.
Yeah, that's it. And what kind of qualifications were there after to actually get the job?
I don't think in those days you had to have a sort of specifically high level of qualification. I had a higher national. In what was then called light current engineering. Electronics didn't exist.
Right.
And so I went with that. But I mean, I think if they could take people with the right aptitude, they weren't too bothered. Not like today, where everybody has to have a degree and a master's degree to get on the ground floor. It's crazy. So that's really how that came about.
That's it. Yeah. So obviously living in Dewsbury wasn't a far trek for you to travel to Emley Moor at all.
Well, I travelled for about 2 or 3 years, and then my then wife decided that she didn't want to work anymore. She was working in Leeds, so we were both going off in a long way at the time. So we moved up to Emley, and it was somewhere where I thought, well, if I haven't got a car, I can walk to work. So we lived in Emley.
That's it. Yeah. So when you what was it called then? So was it the ITA transmission tower at the time?
It was when it was known. Well, there wasn't the tower one there, of course. It was a mast. In fact, when I first went there was a 460-foot lattice structure, like a pylon, which is now up in Scotland somewhere. But it had ceased working because the tubular mast had been finished about a year before I went up there. But internally it was just known as Emley Moor Transmitting Station.
Yeah. So prior to that, there was just a lattice structure there.
There was a 460-foot lattice tower. Which didn't really cover the area all that well. In those days, because it was black and white BBC and ITV, there was only the 2 channels. The BBC came from Holmos, and the ITV came from Emley Moor, because Emley Moor was regional, did Yorkshire, although Yorkshire TV didn't exist. The BBC went both sides of the Pennines because they had a wider service area, and then of course the Winter Hill transmitter covered Granada.
That's it.
And we used to transmit Granada programs during the week, and I can't remember what it was. I think London Weekend came a bit later, but one of the London programs channels during the weekend.
Yeah. So there was a lot of kind of swapping and changing going on between the different television companies then. So
Yeah, well, they were all there was a lot of regional companies. Every
Yeah.
every region more or less had their own, and then just before the Mast collapsed, the Yorkshire had started up, so we had
68,
Yorkshire
wasn't it?
television. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So when you actually worked up there, what were your responsibilities?
Well, at the time I started, I was just known as a technical assistant.
Right.
I think they changed the names after a bit. So I mean, basically, just holding the tools.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
very basic. But I
Yeah.
mean, they gave us proper, well, you're on the job training, and then Marconi's in Chelmsford ran a course because they installed all the kit, and so they ran these courses with it. So I learned sort of television. I didn't know anything about television when I went there.
No. So you were learning.
I learned on the job, and then those two courses, a basic and an advanced course.
So obviously the Mast before was complete. It wasn't actually up for that long, was it?
It wasn't. Well, it had recently been commissioned when I joined in 1966. Exactly when it started, I can't remember now.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was only like there for 3 years that I was working there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was relatively.
And it was never. You could never. Could anyone actually get inside it? Or
Yeah, not visitor wise, but
No.
I mean, I'd been up it. There was a lift up the centre.
Oh, was they? It was.
Yeah.
So it was actually a structure that, even
Yeah.
though it was kind of. Not as classed as a tower, you could actually still enter.
Yeah, I mean, it was
the
quite
structure.
tight in there. I think it was just used for taking technical people up and that sort of thing. It was a very small lift, if I remember rightly. I think you could just about get 1.5 people in it, something like that.
Wow. So you basically the kind of the diameter of the structure would have been a lot smaller than the tower. That's
Considerably.
now.
Well, it was. I don't know if it was the outside diameter or the inside, but it was 9 foot.
Right.
Which is sort of a bit under 3 meters, isn't it?
Yeah. So you're basically looking at the size of this room, really. Aren't
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, it was quite tight.
Yeah. So the lift was just basically there for maintenance purposes.
Oh
wasn't
yeah,
it?
purely that.
Yeah. And there was no, like with the tower that's up now, there's an observation suite, and none of that existed.
No. Well, I mean, even that isn't really for non-technical people. I mean, you do get visitations.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was working there, I used to take people up every time you had visitors, would take them up. You've got to come up, but it wasn't official.
No.
I think mainly because it was put up in such a hurry, they didn't have time to design it in such a way that you could have a rotating restaurant on the top, which a lot of these high structures do now.
They do, yeah. What was the purpose for building it, for putting a glassed observation suite there?
Well, it's an equipment room, really.
Yeah.
There's a load of receivers in there. I mean, there's probably a lot more in since I've been gone. I mean, I've been retired 22 years.
Yeah.
Or 23 now. But there's the receiver equipment. For picking up transmissions from distant stations, which are then monitored down in the control room, and things like that, really. And then there's some of the space was sold off or rented off for other things. There's radio transmitters up there, all sorts of bits and pieces.
Sure. I remember going up myself and seeing the guy that was showing us at the time. This was in 1999, so there were obviously the 5 main terrestrial channels.
Yeah.
And he showed me these huge cables, like this big, where he said, well, that's your BBC one there, your BBC Two, and they look like big pipes.
Yeah. Well, all they are really just a larger form of the TV downlead from your aerial.
Yeah.
It's a coaxial cable.
Yeah.
They obviously got to be quite large to carry the power.
Of course, yeah. So talk us through the day then in 1969 when the Mast came down, because was he one of 3 people that were working on the site?
There was a 3-man shift on. We worked in those days a minimum of 3 people, although it subsequently went down. I think I don't know what they run now, probably 1.
Yeah.
Well, it was because I lived in Emley at the time, and my wife and I needed to go shopping, and we couldn't get in many directions because of fallen cables and things. Everything had iced up during the night. There was a tremendous amount of icing on telegraph wires, telephone wires, electricity cables, and I remember sort of having to find a route into Huddersfield to do the shopping. But I think we changed shifts. I was on the evening shift. We changed about 4:30 in those days.
Yeah.
So I went up around about 4:30 to get started, and I couldn't get past the end of Common Lane because there was a barrier across the road. So no mobile phones in those days. So I nipped back into Emley and phoned the station from there and said, what's going on? They said, oh, it's all right. It's just falling ice. It's been barricaded off for safety reasons. So I sort of took the risk and moved the barrier and drove my car along, hoping I wouldn't get bombed. And then started the evening shift. The day shift went off. I think we had about a quarter of an hour overlap, so they probably went off about 4:45. And then the first things we used to do, because there was 3 of us, 2 of us used to do sort of routine maintenance, changing filters, reading meters and things, while the other guy sat on the control desk and started monitoring the programs. Our first job I did was to go down into the basement, which was mainly the cooling area, all the blowers and things kept down there for the high power transmitters. And I was just looking around there, checking everything was all right. And then there was this terrific rumbling noise. Well, it wasn't that loud when you're downstairs because of the noise of all the blowers and things.
Right.
But the thing that struck me the most was the number of alarm bells going off, because in the corner of the basement there was which was called a switching frame, and basically it powered the aerials from the transmitters in such a way that you could swap the aerials over if one of the transmitters went down. Right. And because then it produced a fault, and which the fault was, of course, so there was no aerial on the end of it, but I didn't know at that time. So I ran out of the combining unit area, the cooling area, as the other 2 guys were coming down the stairs from the control room, and we looked out of the back door, which it was all glass, and couldn't really see anything for the fog. Tremendous amount of fog. And then in the gloom we noticed what looked to be like a bit of the mast, and the engineer in charge, he was a day working man, but he hadn't actually gone home. He said he must have been more aware of what was going on, because he was downstairs on the ground floor, and he says, the mast come down, and we, no, it hasn't, no. But we looked out, and then the fog cleared a little bit and could actually see a section of the mast. And then I think the main worry at the time was there'd been, because the what is now, well, not now, because it was going to be then, the Channel 4 colour and ITV colour TV building, they just handed it over from the builders that day, and it fell across the front end of it and took all the front wall out. But the point I was going to make was that the contractors had been on site, and it had fallen right across their hut. So there was the 2 of us, well, 3 of us went out thinking, I was really sort of a bit scared we were going to find somebody stick it, underneath it.
It's a miracle that nobody actually got killed, isn't it?
It wasn't. Well, I mean, anyway, there wasn't anybody there. No. They'd gone off site a bit before. I think there was only 1 injury in the whole thing, and that was one of the caretakers of the chapel underneath across the road, and he dived underneath the pew and cut his hand, but he wasn't from falling debris or anything.
No.
The engineer in charge was reported as saying, I hid under the table, or I went under the table. What good that would have been, I don't know when it was coming up. But no, it was quite lucky, because it had been an electrician who'd been up the mast to check some icing at, I think, about the 100-foot level, because there was a receiving area up there, and he'd gone to look at that, and he had not long been down and gone. There was a couple of BBC engineers around, because in the BBC building, but I don't know whether they'd been out in it or not. So everybody was really fortunate that the way it fell round the new building, more or less. It could have fallen the other way, and laid us flat.
Exactly. Just serendipitous, I suppose. That just because wasn't there also a school bus that had just
what had happened there was, because the road was closed, the school bus, I don't know which way it was going now, whether it was going up onto the Emley Moor or coming back down. I think it was coming up, but the driver couldn't drive past, obviously because of the barrier, so he let the kids out, and they walked or ran through. They just ran the gauntlet because they wouldn't have known what was happening, and I think that was at 2 or 3 minutes to 5, if I remember right. Well, the mast actually came down at 1 minute past 5, so they were very, very lucky that they weren't anywhere near it.
It's incredible, isn't it? Because there's so many people that were working up there, working in the chapel, so the school kids, and it just missed everybody. Obviously, it got the chapel roof, didn't it?
It did, yeah. It's a bit ironic, really, because the ITA had said to the Methodists, whoever ran, or owned the church and everything, because it had been bombed by ice for a couple of years, and they were always having to patch it up.
Oh,
they said,
really?
we'll build you another chapel anywhere you like. No, they didn't want that. They wanted to stay where they were. So they started putting a steel umbrella over it, which was just a skeleton, a few RSJs sort of, but it was only covering half the building, and the cable that came through the roof fell on the half that hadn't been protected.
Yes.
And ironically, they didn't want to get rid of it, but it's now been turned into 2 houses, and
it has.
The chapel is no longer as a chapel.
I wonder if they still have problems with falling ice from the back, because the sign's still.
Well, there is still a danger from falling ice, but the real problem before was that because it was a guide structure, had steel guy wires holding it up, because that's the only way you can do a narrow tower or a small diameter tower. The ice would actually form on the guy wires at higher up, 1,000 feet, and then there were pieces of ice like that.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
And they would sort of free themselves from the guy and slide down it. But with friction and what have you, they'd come off it at some height or other, like a torpedo. Yeah. And that was what was going through the roof.
Right.
So the idea, I think it was one of the planning criteria, is that we're not having another guide structure up here, because I think a lot of the locals says we don't want a mast here at all.
No.
But that would have been a really bad move sort of as far as TV goes in the area. It had to put something up.
Yeah. So
I think the idea of having a freestanding mast was that, okay, ice can form on it, but unless there's a wind, it's going to slide down the side of it.
Yeah.
So there hasn't been a problem. I don't know whether ice has sort of fallen across the road, but it's just like the ice warning signs are just that, a warning sign.
Yeah. So obviously, once the mist had cleared and you could see what had happened, I suppose then there was the not only the clearing up mission, but also what are they going to use to broadcast? So they had to act swiftly.
Well, yeah. I mean, the first thing we did was, of course, dial 999, and we had them. I've never seen as many flashing blue lights, because it had blocked some of the road, and then of course people at home had realised, from the firm realised that something had happened serious up there. They actually, a lot of working lads from the station actually turned up. But then after that, it was how do we get some transmission going as quickly as possible. The BBC were first off the mark. I think they put up 100 foot or 60 foot, 80 foot, I don't know, I can't remember how high. Just like a little skinny mast that they stuck out the back of a lorry. And they'd obviously got some sort of device that they could do with that, because the only BBC that was coming from there in those days was the BBC Two UHF colour service, which had just started. I can't remember what year it started.
64.
Something like that was pretty. So they got that going in, probably the next day.
Yeah.
And then I've forgotten what we did to start with. I think the first thing they put up was, it was known as a zip-up mast, and basically it was just a tall scaffold tower, which we had on somewhere in the country, I think Lichfield or somewhere, as a reserve mast, and that was put up. The riggers worked sort of like 80 hours on it and just slapped it up.
So were these the Polish riggers?
No, these were our own riggers. Put that up.
Yeah.
As far as I remember, I could be wrong on that, but I think the Polish riggers put up the mast that came from Sweden. And they put that mast up in, I'm sure it was about 80 hours, something really. I mean, they worked round the clocks. They were coming down frozen, having a glass of brandy to warm up and going back up and doing a bit more.
Yeah.
And I can't remember actually what day it was that the mast came down, but I'm pretty sure it was the following Sunday that it was all up and running, because I was on shift again, when the chief engineer from ITA came up and wanted to see it all going, and they made a mistake and put the aerial section in upside down, and it didn't work, so they had to go and change all that. But then following that, they obviously needed something more permanent because the zip up wasn't high enough. I think from memory it was about 150 feet, something like that, which covered some of Yorkshire. It didn't cover all of it because there was only a number of stations, relay stations, that relayed it on from there. That was Scarborough and one in Sheffield, and it wasn't getting a big enough signal, because I remember going to Scarborough to sort of tweak things so that we could pick up a stronger signal. But then they got hold of this Swedish mast, which was 760 feet or something, and I mean there was a big thing about it, you know, Yorkshire Television and doing sort of pictures of it all being shipped from Hull, you know, on the back of wagons, and I think that was the one that the riggers put up, the Polish riggers. But I mean, they got that up in pretty well next to no time.
Yeah, and then that
covered the well. I mean, it was only transmitting VHF services, ITV, and then BBC Two was coming from this other temporary mast, because the structure wasn't big enough to support anything much more than that. They may have got BBC Two onto it at the end. I can't remember, but I don't think so.
So obviously it took them a good couple of years to build the concrete tower. So had they managed to fine tune everything with the temporary mast by this 2-year kind of interim while they were building the new mast?
Well, one of the things they did, because in the initial days there were 2 sets of transmitters for ITV, a running transmitter and a standby. They were identical, they were just a mirror image. Yeah. And the way it worked was that if the TV went off for any reason, I mean TV was always going off in those days, it wasn't that reliable, you just change over from one to the other, which is where the switching frame I mentioned earlier on came in. You'd go downstairs and change things over. So what they did, they got a unit, I've forgotten where that came from now, which actually combined the output from the 2 transmitters. So they, instead of having one transmitting a certain power, they had 2 transmitters producing virtually double the power, which helped the coverage because they hadn't got the height.
Yeah, that's it. I was going to say, because you're looking at least 1,000 feet, aren't you?
Yeah, well, high frequency transmitters transmit like a lighthouse in a straight line.
That's it.
Whereas medium wave and short wave transmitters curl round or bounce off the ionosphere and get around the areas like that. Yeah. So that's how they got around that, and I mean the signal still wasn't as good.
No.
But that managed to get the system working again until the tower structure was completed.
What are your memories of them building the tower then? That must have been.
Oh, it was quite interesting. I don't know what happened to them now. I know the local newspaper had them at one time. I had a load of photographs of actually where they were digging out the foundations. It looked like a big keyhole in the ground because they had to find a way to get down it. The hole was about 20 foot deep. They dug a hole, big, circular hole down to bedrock, which I think is about, the foundation's something like 16 or 18 feet. Right. But they were driving this JCB in and out. It looked like a big keyhole. Yeah. And then they just sort of went from there. And they sort of did because it was concrete, they had to do a concrete fill. I think they did it every other day or something. And they had a self-climbing derrick which went up the middle, which actually was turned into the shaft for the lift. The first lift. There's a new lift up there now, or has been for a while. The first lift was just sort of bunged into the middle of this cage that they put up with a self-climbing derrick on it. I remember going up in that lift when I'm not sure if it's the new one. I think the one that I went in, you could certainly fit probably 4 or 5 people. Yeah, that would probably be the new one. It was on the outside, it was quite big. It climbed up the outside of this cage that they put up. The other one climbed up the inside. It was quite small. I think you get 2, possibly 3 people, and I can't remember now. It was originally designed, it climbed up a rack and pinion. It wasn't a cable lift, and it was originally designed for deep mining in South Africa.
So for going down.
But anyway, it went up as well. It took about 10 minutes to get to the top,
Yeah.
and then because it was gravity coming down, about 8 minutes coming back down, something
sure.
like that. So it's quite a long climb. I'm not sure how long it takes now, I've forgotten, but a lot less than
Just
10
a
minutes.
little less. Yeah, it's like 7 minutes or 6 or 7
something
minutes,
like that. Yeah.
But
I went up in that with the lift inspector was a friend of mine called Geoffrey Firth, and he worked for National Vulcan,
Oh yeah.
who insured it. And you're right, it was just 2-man lift.
Yeah.
And,
Two seems about right.
And he said, the next time I'm doing a lift inspection, you can come with me. 'Cause the company I worked at, he insured our factory lifts.
Yeah.
So I went with him, and he had to test the lift. And as you say, it was just a rack all the way up, 1,000 feet long rack, a little geared motor with a pinion on it.
That's right.
And he took it up about 20 feet, and then pulled the drive off to test the brake, the centrifugal brake.
Yeah, that's right.
So it dropped about 2 feet, and this brake flew out and grabbed.
You hope.
Yeah, I said, don't try it any higher up than that.
no.
But yeah, and I think it took 9 minutes to go up because the cable coiled up on top of the lift.
Yeah.
And then coming back down was 7 minutes because you're losing weight.
That's
as
it.
you
That's it.
Yeah, the cable were just there for communication and stuff, and lighting and stuff like that. Yeah, it did something like that.
But no, it was interesting. Really, and as you said, that the annulus, when you got out of the lift, there's little transmitters all over, dishes and aerials and whatever, pointing all over the place.
Yeah.
I remember getting out of the lift and trying to find something to get hold of.
Just a slight bit of movement makes you feel seasick.
The distance from the exit from the lift to the windows seemed like it was about 100 metres.
Yeah.
It's
an odd sensation.
that
That gentle swaying. It's built with flexible concrete. Now, I don't know much about concrete, but I do know that you can make mixes which are slightly flexible. I mean, it only moves about 10 inches or so at the top.
Is that all? I'm going to ask how much.
It's something like that. That's not the lattice structure with the aerials
no,
above that,
but
the concrete does.
Yeah.
I remember when it had first been commissioned, there was some leaks, and there was like a puddle of water in the morning on the floor in the turret, and there was a matchstick floating around, and you could see the movement because the matchstick stayed still, but it appeared to be going around in a circle.
Oh wow! Yeah.
That was just a gentle. I've been up in some quite strong winds though.
I bet that's an
it moves a
experience.
bit then.
You've never been up when there's been a lightning strike.
No, there has been a few because there was a nice picture in the local paper at one time of a strike.
Yeah, I've got one on my wall actually. Yeah, big.
I've got one of the original prints of that.
Yeah. What were obviously you've got the structural difference between the old guide rope mast and the concrete tower, but were there many technical differences as well between the masts? Did they kind of use the opportunity when they built the concrete tower to kind of update, kind of modernise the entire kind of system?
Not transmission wise, as far as I'm aware, because I mean they didn't have the time to do a lot of things. I mean it was a proven design. It was just something that they took out of the archives and says, right, we'll build that because they needed it quickly. They didn't have time, as I said before, they didn't have time to sort of think about visitors and so on up the top, so it's all quite basic.
Yeah, well, wasn't it a guy from Germany or somewhere that actually designed it?
I can't remember. I think the consultants were Ovarup, which is a Swedish firm.
Oh, Swedish firm.
But the memory's getting a bit vague now.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I was 20 odd then, I'm 80 now.
Over the last nearly 50 years, it will be 50 years of this mast being up. They've obviously added mobile phone facilities. Police, have the police used it as well?
I don't know whether they do or not, because the police mast was by the reservoir, which is about 150, 200 metres.
Is that the one, the kind
just
of
a thin tower?
Yeah,
the thin lattice. Yeah. I don't know whether there's anything up there or not, to be honest. Police-wise, there wasn't in my day. There's quite a lot of sort of local radio stuff up there, and then outside broadcast dishes and things used to be up there. Well, not the outside, not dishes as such. The outside broadcast team used to come to do racing from York and bring a whole load of gear and stick it up there. They were quite regular visitors on a Saturday when there was racing.
What was the deal with that? If you were, say, like an independent broadcaster and it's like you had an event, like you say with the horse racing, would you have to rent the space?
Honestly don't know. I would imagine they probably had some financial agreement with Yorkshire Television. I can't see them just saying, go ahead with it. But basically I think it was only, certainly in the days I can remember, it was only Yorkshire Television that did outside broadcasts from there.
Yeah.
And because when the mast came down, that caused them a bit of a problem. They had to build a scaffolding tower and put a dish on the top of that to get stuff out.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that there when they were actually building the tower.
Yeah. Do you remember who actually paid for the tower being built? Was it the IBA? Or
I presume IBA paid for it, but and I presume they got, because insurance took a long time before they got any money out of them there. So I presume it had to come out of deep pockets to start with.
Yeah.
It took quite some years for litigation. I've forgotten how long now, but it was at least 10.
Yeah.
Before they actually got any money.
Yeah.
Did they put the collapse of the tower down to a design issue, or?
It's one of these funny things. People who were there at the time, worked there at the time, have always got slightly different stories. But the story, as I understand it, a lot of people says, it was the wind brought it down. Well, I know for a fact there was zero wind at the time, because we used to do a Met report. Which is, just send all the observations on wind and cloud and rain and things like that to the Met Office every 3 hours. And in the book, because I think I'd filled one out at the beginning of the shift, there was zero wind. We know that for a fact. But strangely enough, somebody tore the page out of the book, the reporting book, and it disappeared. Now, whether that was done to hide anything, like there was no wind, I don't know. But I think in terms of wind, there could well have been there obviously would have been some air movement at 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
I think I seem to remember that wind speed doubles every 1,000 feet or something like that. But so 0 times 2 is 0. But they reckon there may well have been a resonant wind speed of about 7 knots. And the calculation said that the mast was resonant at 7 knots. In other words, it moved the maximum bit. And there's quite a lot was said about vortex shedding, which I won't go into. I did a program for an American company actually, and they talked a lot about, they had an expert on vortex shedding. He talked quite a lot about it. So yes, it probably there was a resonance in the mast, so it moved a little bit more than it should have done. But what appears to have actually happened is one of the shackles holding one of the guys near the top actually pulled out. Well, a guide mast is only as good as the guys, so if one guy disappears, the whole thing becomes unstable. And it was quite heavily loaded, lopsided, asymmetrically, because of ice on one side, and which probably pulled, put this shackle into tension, and then that's the one that failed. Because once when it came down like a zip, bang, 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 bang.
Exactly. Once you've got one weak link there, then that's it. It'll just throw everything off kilter.
But my own belief is they never really got 100% accurate decision on how it actually came down. There was a lot of supposition, and obviously there was a weakness in the shackle that came off. The tubular structure that stood on the top with the aerials in was actually a triangular mast inside those bits of stuff like you showed me earlier. The fiberglass stuff. And I think one of the flanges actually broke off, and then the mast was the tubular bit was able to lean over a bit further than it should have done. And that's probably what put extra strain on the shackle. But I'm no mechanical engineer, and so I wouldn't like to sort of say, it definitely was that.
It was, you need a tremendous amount of wind. The teardrop effect, where they now put twists down.
Those striations that they put in there, that's to break up the vortex, because vortex shedding, the wind goes one side then the other, and then you get sort of a doubling of wind speed. It's quite a science.
And then it is, and then it goes pop. And it just goes back on itself, and you get
quite a lot of oscillation,
natural frequency, and then the job's over.
Right.
Down it comes.
Yeah. Well, this American company I did a film for, they had some quite a good model showing the consultant engineer who took over the description of how it all came down.
Yeah.
You know, he actually made quite a good explanation of how vortex shedding
Yeah.
works. But I say I'm not entirely convinced.
It's
One of the things they did with the two other masts, because there was three of the same structure.
Yeah.
There's Winter Hill, which was 1,000 foot, and then there's one at Belmont in Lincolnshire, which was the same height, 1065 feet.
Right.
And they hung about 20 tons of chains down the middle to damp the oscillations out.
Right.
So anyway, the others are still there.
Yes. Yeah. The other two are still. In fact, didn't they? Wasn't there a fire just recently up at Winter Hill?
No, that was at Billsdale.
Oh, Billsdale.
Yeah,
was it?
it actually damaged the mast, and they blew it up, took it down. I don't know what they're doing now.
Right. I
Because
see.
we were wondering whether the temporary mast, which is at Emley at the moment, the one that's standing beside it, why they didn't take that down and take it up to Billsdale. So I don't know what's happening up there. I don't think there was anything like that, but I do remember on the lattice tower, the 450 foot one, there were heaters in the aerial section on that.
Yeah.
Because I never used them because it ceased transmitting them. But I always remember the switches were on the control desk for heat, mast aerial heating. I think it was marked something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have thought the insurance company would be targeting the design company then.
Yeah.
But I don't know how practical it would be. But I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Put heating.
But it's right, a single failure of one guide rope,
and that's it.
and it multiplies the stress on the others
and then it just,
tenfold.
Yeah.
Now, Alan, this is something that you might recognise.
I do.
This
Yes,
is a
it's
piece of the original mast.
It's the fiberglass cladding which went round the aerial structure.
Yeah.
Above can't remember exact height now, but it was about 1,000 feet, 800 and something, I think, where the mast actually began, the aerial section began, and then the aerials were built in a lattice structure, triangular structure above that, and then there was these panels that wrapped round it to protect the aerials from the weather.
So this particular panel would have been part of the structure way right up at the top?
Right at the top, yeah.
Wow.
So
that's incredible, yeah. So obviously I know you've corrected the time. It says 5:25 there, but it was indeed 5:01.
Blazoned on my memory. March the 19th, 1969 at 17:01.
17:01.
And my the senior engineer on the shift, who's unfortunately no longer with us, he wrote in the logbook, "Transmission ceased."
So basically, you obviously retired 22 years ago, so that was in
99 I actually
99.
retired, so a bit longer than that.
Yeah.
1999.
So you obviously left before the switch from analog to digital.
Yeah, I think they were still working on multiplexing Channel 5 in when I left, and all that's happened since. I mean, I've been up and seen it since and talked to the engineers who are working there, but it's quite complicated now in that everything goes down, 2 channels I think now, whereas it used to be 5 channels, and that was only 5 programs.
Yeah. Did you have any kind of celebrity guests who asked for a trip up to the West?
When the day the tower was actually commissioned, an MP who was an athlete.
Chris Chataway.
There was Chris Chataway.
Chris Chataway.
The name was there on the top of my head, and it just disappeared. But we had a few other parliamentarians around. I remember Margarita Lasky. I don't remember her. She was on a committee doing. They were looking at how to change the TV times, and I can't remember what year it was, but she was there with a few others. They were just sort of asking people who worked in the industry what we thought of the TV times. I think long, it's just really a bit vague. I suppose there have been a lot of other odd people. Well, I don't mean odd people, but you know what I mean. Richard Whiteley was there doing sort of the speaking bits in between when the mast came down. Richard Whiteley, late of Yorkshire Television, he was there quite a bit. There's been a few other people, people who've come up over the years. I can't remember them all.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that makes all three of us then lucky enough to have a trip up the Mast. I absolutely loved it. It's been a dream since I was a kid, so I was 21 at the time. And it was fantastic. I took a video camera with me and recorded the trip. And one of the best bits in the footage is when I'm looking through the glass windows at the top, and I say to the guy, I forgot his name, who took us up, but he was a real character. And I said, so how far can you see from here then, meaning the horizon? And he said, well, you can see the sun, how far do you want to see?
Very clever, yeah.
It's one of those kind of bucket list kind of things that I'm sure a lot of people would like to tick off, and you've been there and done it and worn the t-shirt.
We were up and down quite a few times with equipment up there that needed maintaining and all sorts of things. But it was never designed with tourists in mind, and I don't know what it's like now, but at that time it was definitely, no, you can't go up, but we used to do it at weekend. They don't even seem to like people on the site these days. When I was doing this thing for this American TV company, the guy who was doing the filming and everything, he wanted to do some filming on the site, and they wouldn't even let him on the site. We did a lot of stuff walking around outside. Seemed a bit silly to me, but I mean, things have tightened up, and the guy in charge now I've never ever met. So, there was plenty of routine stuff where, especially in the early days, where transmitters would go off the air. I think the weakest link was the link between the studios, which could have been London studios or Granada studios, or later on Yorkshire. But the link between the studios and because it was all radio stuff. And it was run by the post office in those days, which were the forerunners of BT, or Openreach as it now is for the technical side of it. And we had a telecine machine up there, and if the link went down for more than a certain length of time, we actually had a film. We could run a film. But the films never ever got finished because they always got the thing back halfway through the film.
That's it.
The transmission was the programs were more important than our film. So it was a bit of a waste of time, and it was taken out of service.
I suppose it'd been like a test card almost kind of thing.
Well, it was usually a feature film,
right?
Because every Monday we used to have to run the machine and make sure the film still worked, and it was changed every now and again. I can't remember any really major incidents. I'm not at Emley. I mean, around the country there'd been odd ones. One of the Cornish or the Devon one actually the mast got hit by a jet. Well, it didn't plough into the mast, but it hit the guy, and it chopped a section off the wing because they had it in the garage down there. I've forgotten which station it was now, Cornwall, I think. So there's been odd sort of incidents like that, but nothing.
No.
I mean, the bigger one. Well, I suppose there was the one at Billsdale when one of the transmitters caught fire. I was talking earlier on about a fire, but there was a fire. I can't remember what year it was now, and I think we were still. Well, we certainly hadn't gone multiplex then. It was certainly discrete channels, and that they ran the same as we did. One transmitter on and one transmitter as a reserve, and one caught fire, and it was sort of so delicate, the fact there was only one transmitter left until they rebuilt the other. They manned the station. Well, not 24 hours a day because programs finished at sort of around midnight. But I remember I was up there on 2 or 3 occasions. Just babysitting it during the evening in case anything went wrong, and then of course there was the fire since I've left, where the combining unit, which brings all the channels together and sends them up the same aerial, overheated as far as we know, and caused a fire, but it damaged the structure of the mast and it was deemed unsafe, and they brought it down. But that's all since I've left, so I don't know any details on that. They're a bit cagey about that, because although I know Guy was the maintenance manager for the area, even he's retired, but I mean he didn't know exactly what went wrong. Might come out in the end.
I'm absolutely fascinated by it. Thank you.
Well, I hope I've told you some truths anyway.